The bridge of the Resolute was suffused with a tense silence. Screens glowed with data streams, the hum of machinery filling the air. General Kale Voss stood at the command console, his posture rigid, his sharp gaze locked on a flickering transmission. The room was packed with crew members, but no one dared to speak. The holoscreen finally sharpened, revealing a scene that made Kale's gut twist. His father, the man who had taught him resilience and integrity, stood bound before a firing squad on Arkhaven. Blood streaked his face, but his eyes burned with defiance. High Executor Drath Vosk's voice crackled through the speakers, sharp and venomous. "This is the fate of all who dare defy the Empire," he declared, gesturing grandly. The camera panned to Kale's father, who lifted his chin. "You may kill me, but you cannot break humanity. We will rise." The executor sneered, signaling the soldiers. A flash of plasma illuminated the screen, and then blackness. The broadcast ended abruptly, leaving a silence more deafening than any explosion. Kale's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles pale. His crew exchanged nervous glances. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, simmering fury. "Lieutenant Yora, report." Yora, his second in command, stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Sir, the Imperial garrison on Arkhaven remains under strength. 2 cruisers in orbit, standard defenses. Reinforcements will take 3 days to arrive." Kale's expression hardened. 3 days. Yora hesitated. "General, with respect, an assault could escalate tensions beyond control. The Empire might see this as an act of rebellion, not retaliation." Kale turned sharply, his glare cutting. "They murdered my father, Yora. This isn't rebellion, it's justice. Humanity cannot afford to let them trample us without consequence." Yora's voice was cautious. "I understand, sir. But we must act strategically. A misstep could cost millions of lives." Kale's tone was icy, though his anger was controlled. "Strategic? Do you think letting them slaughter us unchecked is strategic?" He took a breath, steadying himself. "We will strike Arkhaven. Prepare the fleet." Yora gave a reluctant nod. "Yes, sir." As the lieutenant moved to issue orders, Kale remained at the console, staring at the now blank screen. The weight of command was crushing, but the pain of loss was worse. Kale retreated to his quarters, the hum of the ship's engines a constant reminder of their purpose. The room was sparse, its only personal touch a small holographic frame on his desk. He activated it, and the image of his father flickered to life, a much younger Kale standing beside him in a field of golden crops on Arkhaven. His father's voice echoed in his mind, a memory from long ago, *. "The stars may seem vast and cold, son, but they don't own us. We choose who we are. *. The knock on his door broke his reverie. "Enter," Kale called. Yora stepped in, his expression grim. "General, I wanted to discuss the plan." Kale motioned for him to continue, though his patience was wearing thin. "Sir, if we strike Arkhaven, we need precision. Civilian casualties will only strengthen the Empire's propaganda against us. We can't afford to lose the moral high ground." Kale studied Yora for a moment, his sharp features unreadable. "You're suggesting I hold back?" "I'm suggesting we make our message clear," Yora replied. "This isn't about vengeance, it's about survival. Show the galaxy that humanity fights for justice, not destruction." For a moment Kale's anger flared, but he pushed it down. Yora wasn't wrong, even if Kale hated the restraint it demanded. "Fine. We'll strike with precision. But mark my words, Lieutenant, we will make the Empire regret underestimating us." Yora nodded, relieved. "Understood, sir." Hours later, the Resolute's officers gathered in the war room. A holographic map of Arkhaven hovered over the table, displaying the garrison's location and the Imperial fleet positions. Kale addressed his team, his voice steady and commanding. "Our mission is twofold. We cripple the Empire's forces on Arkhaven while minimizing civilian harm. First, we neutralize their orbital defenses. Then, we strike the garrison with ground teams. Speed and precision are key." A younger officer, Lieutenant Farron, raised his hand. Sir, what's the extraction plan if reinforcements arrive early? We fight, Cale replied without hesitation. If reinforcements arrive, we'll adapt. This mission cannot fail. The room was silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone present. Cale's gaze swept the table. Questions? When none came, he nodded. Dismissed. Prepare your teams. The fleet assembled at the edge of Arkhaven's orbit, a silent wall of human ingenuity and determination. The Resolute led the charge, its sleek hull gleaming against the backdrop of stars. Cale stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the planet below. Status report, he ordered. All ships in position, Yora replied. Awaiting your command. Cale took a deep breath. The moment felt heavier than any battle he'd faced before. Begin the assault. The fleet surged forward, plasma cannons lighting up the void as they fired on the Imperial cruisers. Explosions bloomed in the darkness, debris scattering like embers in the wind. Focus fire on their engines and weapons, Cale commanded. Disable them, don't destroy them. We need their wreckage to tell our story. The bridge was alive with activity, officers shouting orders and coordinating strikes. Cale remained calm, his voice a steady anchor amidst the chaos. On the surface, dropships descended through the atmosphere, delivering strike teams to key locations. Yora led the charge, his voice steady over the comms. Team Alpha, secure the perimeter. Team Bravo, with me, neutralize the command center. Cale monitored the operation from the bridge, his fingers gripping the console. Every second felt like an eternity. An explosion on the main screen drew his attention. One of the Imperial cruisers had been disabled, its engines erupting in flames. Cheers rippled through the bridge, but Cale's expression remained stoic. Focus, he ordered. This isn't over. Yora's voice crackled through the comms. Garrison secured. Minimal casualties. Awaiting extraction orders. Cale allowed himself a rare moment of relief. Good work, Lieutenant. Begin evacuation. As the fleet regrouped, Cale stared out at the stars, his mind already turning to the battles ahead. This strike was only the beginning. The Empire had drawn first blood, but humanity would ensure they paid the price. Set course for the next target, Cale commanded, his voice resolute. The Resolute surged forward, and with it, the unbreakable will of its crew. The Resolute cruised through hyperspace, the hum of its engines a steady reminder of the mission's weight. On the bridge, Cale Voss stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The fleet had successfully struck Arkhaven, but the battle left no room for satisfaction. Lieutenant Yora, Cale called, his voice breaking the silence. Yora approached, tablet in hand. General, we've compiled the data from Arkhaven. Civilian casualties were minimal, but the message was clear. The Empire will respond. Cale nodded, his jaw tightening. Good. Let them know humanity won't be a forgotten footnote in their empire. What's our next target? Yora swiped across the tablet, revealing a detailed map of nearby systems. Helios Station. It's a minor Imperial outpost, but strategically valuable. It's a communications hub connecting the outer colonies to the Empire's core worlds. Disabling it would disrupt their coordination for weeks. Cale studied the map, his mind already calculating the risks. What defenses are we looking at? 2 defense platforms and a small fleet of frigates. Nothing like Arkhaven, but they'll be on alert after our strike. Cale's lips pressed into a thin line. Helios is important, but we can't afford heavy losses. We'll use the same precision tactics as before. Quick, efficient, and minimal collateral damage. Yora hesitated. And if reinforcements arrive? Then we adapt, Cale replied firmly. Prepare the fleet for immediate deployment. Helios Station won't see us coming. Hours later, Cale stood in the war room, addressing his officers. The holographic map of Helios Station spun slowly, its defense platforms glowing ominously. Helios Station is critical to the Empire's communication network, Cale began. Our objective is to disable it without destroying it. We need the station intact to prevent them from rerouting their network too quickly. Ground teams will infiltrate, plant EMP charges, and retreat. Timing is everything. Lieutenant Farron leaned forward, studying the projection. What about the defense platforms? If they detect us, they'll tear us apart before we can reach the station. Cale gestured to the hologram, highlighting weak points in the platform's design. We'll deploy decoy drones to draw their fire while our bombers target their shield generators. Once the platforms are disabled, our dropships can move in. Farron nodded, though his face remained tense. Understood, sir. Yora stepped forward. What about their fleet? Even with decoys, we'll need to neutralize their frigates quickly to prevent them from calling reinforcements. Cale's gaze swept across the room. We'll rely on precision strikes. Every pilot and gunner must execute flawlessly. This mission isn't just about Helios, it's about proving humanity can outthink and outfight the Empire. Questions? When none came, Cale nodded. Good. Prepare for launch. The fleet emerged from hyperspace near Helios Station, the massive structure glinting against the black void. Cale stood on the bridge, his heart steady despite the stakes. Deploy the drones, he ordered. The Resolute's launch bays opened, releasing dozens of decoy drones that immediately began emitting false signatures. The defense platforms responded, their turrets swiveling to track the perceived threats. Shields on Platform 1 at 60%. Yora reported, his voice calm but urgent. Bombers are moving into position. Have them target the shield generators, Cale commanded. Keep the platforms focused on the drones. The bridge buzzed with activity as the fleet executed its maneuvers. The defense platforms fired relentlessly, but the decoys absorbed the brunt of their attacks. Bombers swooped in, releasing precision strikes that sent ripples of explosions across the platform's shields. Platform 1 disabled, Yora announced. Platform 2's shields are down to 40%. Keep the pressure on, Cale said, his gaze fixed on the battle unfolding on the main screen. Meanwhile, dropships descended toward Helios Station, weaving through debris and evading enemy fire. Inside one of the ships, Yora led the ground team, his rifle slung across his chest. Team Alpha status? Yora asked over the comm. Approaching the central relay, a voice replied. Minimal resistance so far. Yora turned to his own team. Stay sharp. The Empire doesn't leave key stations undefended. As the dropship landed in a hangar, the team disembarked swiftly, weapons at the ready. The station's interior was cold and utilitarian, its walls lined with conduits and glowing data terminals. Move out, Yora ordered, his voice low. The team advanced through the station's corridors, their boots echoing softly. They encountered sporadic resistance, Imperial guards who were quickly neutralized with silenced weapons. At the central relay, Team Alpha planted the EMP charges with practiced efficiency. Yora checked his watch, his pulse steady. Charges set. 5 minutes until detonation. Everyone back to the dropships. On the bridge of the Resolute, Cale monitored the operation closely. The defense platforms were fully disabled, and the Imperial frigates were retreating, their engines trailing sparks. Ground teams are en route to the dropships. Yora's voice came over the comm. Charges will detonate in 3 minutes. Good work, Cale replied. Fleet, prepare to extract. We're not lingering. As the dropships ascended, the EMP charges detonated, sending waves of blue energy rippling through Helios Station. Lights flickered and died, leaving the massive structure a lifeless husk. Cheers erupted across the Resolute's bridge, but Cale raised a hand. Hold your celebrations. We're not out of this yet. Yora's voice came through again, more urgent this time. General, long-range sensors are picking up an Imperial battle group entering the system. Estimated arrival, 4 minutes. Cale's jaw tightened. All ships prepare for emergency hyperspace jump. Helios Station is neutralized. We're done here. The fleet began to regroup, their engines flaring to life. On the main screen, Cale watched as the first Imperial warships emerged from hyperspace, their massive silhouettes looming ominously. Jump now! Kale ordered. The fleet vanished into hyperspace just as the Imperial battle group opened fire, their shots hitting only empty space. Back on the Resolute, Kale stood in the war room with Yora and the senior officers. The success of the Helios mission was undeniable, but the stakes had only grown higher. The Empire will retaliate, Yora said, his tone somber. Kale nodded, his expression grim. Let them. For every colony they target, we'll strike back twice as hard. This war isn't about survival anymore, it's about showing the galaxy what humanity is capable of. The officers exchanged resolute glances. Kale's determination was contagious, his unyielding will inspiring even in the face of overwhelming odds. As the meeting concluded, Kale lingered, staring at the holographic map of Imperial territory. He knew the road ahead would only grow more perilous, but he also knew one thing for certain: humanity would not bow. The Resolute glided silently through the darkness of space, its crew abuzz with quiet determination. After the success at Helios Station, the Empire's inevitable retaliation loomed heavy on every mind. General Kale Voss stood at the observation deck, staring at the swirling stars. His reflection on the glass was stern, the weight of humanity's survival etched into his features. General, Lieutenant Yora called softly from the doorway. The officers are waiting for you in the war room. Kale nodded, turning to follow. Let's not keep them waiting. As they entered the war room, the tension was palpable. The holographic display flickered to life, projecting the Empire's latest movements. A massive battle group, led by the dreadnought Imperator, was advancing toward the Midrim colonies, humanity's largest cluster of independent settlements. They're sending the Imperator? Kale's voice was calm, but his eyes narrowed. That's no show of strength. It's a message. Yora stepped forward, pointing to the projection. The battle group is 2 days away. If they reach the Midrim, they'll raise the colonies to ash. The dreadnought's firepower alone could obliterate entire cities. The officers murmured in concern, but Kale raised a hand for silence. Then we intercept them. The Imperator may be powerful, but it's not invincible. We've faced worse odds before. Commander Farron frowned. With respect, General, we're vastly outgunned. Even with the element of surprise, this could be a suicide mission. Kale's gaze bore into Farron's. And if we let them reach the Midrim, what then? Billions will die. If this is a suicide mission, it's one worth taking. Farron hesitated, then nodded. Understood, sir. Yora tapped the controls, shifting the hologram to display the Imperator's escort fleet. We'll need a multi-pronged strategy. Disabling the dreadnought's shields is our top priority, but their escorts will be a significant obstacle. Kale's voice was firm. Divide the fleet into 3 strike groups. Group 1 will engage the escorts, drawing their fire. Group 2 will target the Imperator's engines, crippling its mobility. Group 3, led by the Resolute, will go for the shield generators. Once those are down, we'll focus all firepower on the main reactor. Yora glanced at the display. The Imperator's shields are reinforced with overlapping energy fields. It'll take a coordinated effort to bring them down. Kale met his gaze. Then we coordinate. We've faced worse odds, and we've prevailed. This will be no different. The officers exchanged determined nods. There was no room for doubt, not in this fight. The fleet emerged from hyperspace hours later, just beyond the Empire's sensor range. The Resolute hovered at the forefront, its crew preparing for battle. Kale stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back. Status report, he ordered. Yora responded quickly. Strike groups are in position. The Imperator and its escorts remain unaware of our presence. Kale's eyes narrowed. Good. We strike fast and hard. Begin the assault. The fleet surged forward, breaking into its designated groups. The escorts, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. Kale watched as the first salvos were exchanged, streaks of plasma cutting through the void. Group 1, engage the escorts directly, Kale commanded. Keep them occupied. On the main screen, Group 1's ships clashed with the Imperial frigates, their maneuvers precise despite the chaos. Kale's heart pounded, but his voice remained steady. Group 2, move in on the Imperator-S engines. Disable them before they can react. Yora relayed the orders, and Group 2 advanced, bombers darting through the firefight to deliver their payloads. Explosions rippled across the dreadnought's massive hull, but its shields held firm. Kale turned to Yora. Prepare the Resolute. We're taking down those shield generators. As the Resolute approached the dreadnought, its turrets fired relentlessly, carving a path through the chaos. The Imperator-S guns roared in response, but the Resolute-S pilots evaded with practiced precision. Lock onto the shield generator array, Kale ordered. Target their weak points. The ship's gunners obeyed, unleashing a barrage of focused fire. The dreadnought's shields shimmered and flickered, their energy strained under the assault. Shield strength at 60%, Yora reported. Keep firing, Kale said, his voice like steel. We're not stopping until they're down. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the Resolute, sending the crew staggering. Yora gripped the console, his voice urgent. Direct hit to our port side. Shields holding, but we've lost 2 turrets. Kale gritted his teeth. Divert power from non-essential systems to the shields. We can't afford to lose momentum. The ship shuddered as another blast struck, but the Resolute pressed on. Its weapons tore into the Imperator-S shield generators, the strain finally overwhelming them. Shields down to 20%, Yora shouted. Kale's eyes blazed. All ships, focus fire on the main reactor. Take it out now! The fleet converged on the dreadnought, their combined firepower overwhelming its weakened defenses. Explosions erupted along its hull, tearing through its massive structure. Inside the Imperator, chaos reigned. Imperial officers barked orders, their panic evident as systems failed one by one. The dreadnought's captain glared at the main display, his voice trembling with rage. How is this possible? They're only humans! Back on the Resolute, Kale watched as the dreadnought began to fracture. Fall back, he ordered. The Imperator is finished. The fleet withdrew, maintaining formation as the dreadnought's core finally detonated. The explosion was blinding, a massive sphere of fire and debris consuming everything in its wake. Cheers erupted across the Resolute, but Kale remained silent, his focus unbroken. General, Yora said softly. The battle is won. Kale nodded, his expression unreadable. It's a victory, but the war is far from over. In the aftermath, Kale addressed the fleet from the bridge. His voice was steady, but there was a fire in his eyes. Today, we proved that humanity is not to be underestimated. The Empire may have their dreadnoughts, their fleets, their armies, but they do not have our resolve. This is only the beginning. Together, we will show them that humanity will not bow. We will rise. The crew erupted into cheers, their spirits lifted by his words. But as Kale turned back to the observation deck, his thoughts were already on the battles to come. The Empire had drawn first blood, but humanity had answered. And Kale Voss would ensure they continued to answer until the galaxy was free.